My name is Clara Morgan, I'm 31 years old, and I was about to be written out of my late father's $154 million inheritance. Before I tell you how a single smile from a lawyer changed everything, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The air in the lawyer's conference room was so cold it felt like it was stealing the breath from my lungs. It smelled of old paper and lemon polish, a sterile scent that did nothing to cover the stench of greed hanging over the long, mahogany table. I sat at the far end, my hands clenched in my lap, my knuckles white. Across from me, at the head of the table like a queen holding court, was my stepmother, Brenda. She wore a black designer suit that probably cost more than my bakery's monthly rent. Her hair was sprayed into a perfect, immovable helmet, and a diamond necklace glittered at her throat. Beside her, her two children, Kevin and Tiffany, lounged in their chairs, scrolling through their phones. They were my half-siblings, but they looked at me like I was something they'd scraped off their shoe. For 13 years, I hadn't set foot in my father's world. 13 years of building a life for myself, one flower-dusted morning at a time. I hadn't expected a thing from this day, not really. I was here out of a final, lingering sense of duty to the man my father once was, not the stranger he'd become. Brenda leaned over to her son, Kevin, and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. Just get this over with, so we can finally fumigate the past. It felt like a punch to the gut. The past. That's what I was to her. Not a daughter, not family. Just something to be cleaned away. The door opened and Mr. Davis, my father's longtime lawyer, walked in. He was a kind-looking man in his 60s, his face etched with weary lines. He gave me a brief, sympathetic nod before setting a thick leather-bound folder on the table. The sound echoed in the silence. "Good morning," he said, his voice grave. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Robert Morgan." Brenda sat up straighter, a smug, satisfied smirk playing on her lips. She crossed her legs, the expensive fabric of her suit rustling. She looked at me, her eyes glittering with triumph. She had won. After all these years, she had finally, completely won. I braced myself. I focused on a tiny scratch in the wood of the table, trying to anchor myself. Mr. Davis cleared his throat and began to read. His voice was a low, steady drone, listing legal terms that blurred together. I heard my father's full name, Robert Elias Morgan, and my heart gave a painful lurch. Then came the part that mattered. I, Robert Elias Morgan, Mr. Davis read, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate, including all real property, liquid assets, and personal belongings, to my beloved wife, Brenda Morgan, and our children, Kevin Morgan and Tiffany Morgan. The words hit me like a physical blow. The air was sucked from my lungs. It was done. 13 years of being an outcast, and this was the final nail in the coffin. I was officially nothing. A footnote in my own father's life. Brenda's smirk widened into a full, triumphant grin. She reached over and squeezed Kevin's hand. Tiffany finally looked up from her phone, a nasty little smile on her face as she stared right at me. They were enjoying this. They were feeding off my humiliation. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just sat there, feeling a cold numbness spread through me. It was over. I could go back to my bakery, back to my quiet life, and close this chapter for good. But then, something strange happened. Mr. Davis paused. He shuffled the papers in front of him, his gaze lifting from the page. For a fraction of a second, his eyes met mine across the long table. And in that moment, I saw it. It wasn't a big, obvious gesture. It was tiny. Barely there. The corner of his mouth twitched. A faint, almost imperceptible smile flickered across his lips before vanishing. It was a secret, a spark of something that didn't belong in this cold, sterile room. I thought I knew how this story ended. But that tiny, fleeting smile told me I hadn't even reached the beginning. To understand it, you have to go back to my mother's roses. Before the cold marble and the smell of Brenda's perfume, there was sunshine. There was the rich, dark soil of our little farm just outside of Austin, and the sweet scent of baking that always clung to my mother's clothes. My world was small, but it was perfect. My mother, Eleanor, was the heart of it. She was a gentle woman with flour on her apron and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. She believed there was no problem on earth that couldn't be made a little better with a warm cinnamon roll. Our house was modest, a little farmhouse with a wide porch and shutters that needed a fresh coat of paint. But to me, it was a palace. And the jewels of our kingdom were my mother's roses. She had a garden that wrapped around the side of the house, a riot of color and fragrance. There were deep crimson ones she called Mr. Lincoln and pale, creamy ones named Peace. She knew every one of them by name. She'd tend to them for hours, her hands protected by worn leather gloves, humming a soft tune. She used to tell me, "Clara, honey, everything that grows needs love to thrive. People are no different." My father, Robert, was a different kind of force. He was a builder, a man who saw potential in empty lots and blueprints. In the world outside our farm, he was a commanding presence, but at home, he was just Dad. He was the one who'd lift me onto his shoulders so I could see over the fence, the one who'd make silly faces at the dinner table just to hear me giggle. He adored my mother. I'd catch him watching her in the garden, a soft, private smile on his face, the kind of look that made me feel safe and warm all over. He was the sturdy frame to our family's picture, and my mother was the beautiful, vibrant color within it. We weren't wealthy then, not in the way Brenda would later define it. My father's construction company was still growing. But we had everything that mattered. We had pancake Saturdays and firefly-chasing summer nights. We had a home filled with laughter and the constant, comforting scent of roses and baking bread. I was 9 years old, and I thought life would always be that sweet. Then came a Tuesday in October. The sky was a sharp, brilliant blue, the kind that hurts your eyes. My father was out of town for a business meeting. My mother picked me up from school, and she'd promised me a hot chocolate on the way home, a special treat. We were in her old station wagon, the one that always smelled faintly of fertilizer and dog hair. She was singing along to the radio, her voice a little off-key but full of joy. We were crossing an intersection, a quiet one we crossed every day. I was looking out the window, tracing the shape of a cloud with my finger. I remember the sound first. A horrifying, high-pitched screech of tires that didn't belong in our peaceful afternoon. My mother gasped, a sharp, terrified sound. I turned my head, and all I saw was the massive grille of a delivery truck, impossibly close, a wall of red metal that was blocking out the sun. I don't remember the impact. I just remember the world going sideways. The sound of shattering glass. Then, a sudden, crushing silence. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the cold, hard pavement. My leg was screaming with a pain I'd never imagined. My ears were ringing. I pushed myself up, my head swimming. The station wagon was a mangled wreck a few feet away. And my mother was lying on the asphalt, so still. Her hand, the one that had held mine just minutes before, was outstretched, her palm facing up, empty. I don't remember screaming her name, but the paramedics later told my father I wouldn't stop. They told him I kept calling for her, over and over, as they lifted me onto a stretcher. She was gone before the ambulance ever reached the hospital. The man in the truck had run a red light. A simple, stupid mistake that had ripped my world apart. For weeks, I lived in a fog. My father and I were like two ghosts haunting our own house. The silence was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. We'd sit at the dinner table, the food untouched, and sometimes he'd reach across and just hold my hand. His grip was tight, desperate. I could see the cracks in him, the hollow look in his eyes when he'd come home from work. He buried himself in his job, working longer and longer hours. I think the house, with my mother's memory in every room, was too much for him to bear. We had each other, but our shared grief was a chasm between us, not a bridge. We were two people drowning in the same ocean, too broken to save each other. The warmth was gone. The sunshine was gone. And the roses in the garden began to wilt. Grief does a strange thing to a home. It steals the color from the walls and the warmth from the air. For 2 years, our little farmhouse was a grayscale photograph of what it once was. My father was a shadow, always leaving early, coming home late. The silence between us grew heavier, filled with all the things we couldn't say. I was 11 when he finally brought a splash of color back into the house. Her name was Brenda. He'd met her at a real estate event. She was younger than him, by nearly 20 years, with glossy brown hair and a smile that seemed more practiced than felt. The first time he brought her home for dinner, she walked in wearing a dress that was too tight and a perfume so strong it made my eyes water. It was a sharp, musky scent that felt like an assault on the soft, lavender and rose-scented air of my mother's house. She tried to be nice, but it was like watching an actress play a part she hadn't rehearsed enough. She'd ask me questions about school, her head tilted, her bright red nails tapping on the table, but her eyes would dart around the room, assessing, cataloging. She laughed a little too loudly at my father's jokes and touched his arm a little too often. I was just a kid, but I knew performance when I saw it. She wasn't interested in me. She was interested in what came with my father, his growing business, his vulnerability. 3 months later, they were married. The wedding was a small, sterile affair at a courthouse. I wore a dress Brenda had picked out, a stiff, uncomfortable thing that wasn't my style. The day she moved in for good was the day my home truly died. The invasion was swift and brutal. The first things to go were my mother's belongings. Brenda packed them all into boxes, taping them shut with a brisk, efficient cruelty. "We need a fresh start, Robert," she'd said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Too many painful memories here." My father, lost in his own world of grief and perhaps blinded by this new, bright distraction, just nodded. The soft, rose-patterned curtains in the living room were replaced with heavy, dark drapes. The family photos on the mantelpiece, of my mother, of the 3 of us on vacation, disappeared, replaced by abstract art in cold, gold frames. The scent of Brenda's perfume was everywhere, a constant, cloying presence that erased the last traces of my mother. But the cruelest blow, the one that felt like a physical violation, was what she did to the garden. One spring morning, I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. I ran outside and saw 2 men with chainsaws standing by my mother's rose garden. Brenda was there, directing them, a blueprint in her hand. "What are you doing?" I screamed, my voice cracking. She turned to me, her expression one of mild annoyance. "We're putting in an infinity pool, Clara. It will be fabulous for entertaining. These old bushes are just a mess. They were my mother's." I cried, tears streaming down my face. "Yes, well," she said, turning back to the workmen. "Things change." I watched, helpless, as they tore them out. The crimson Mr. Lincoln, the creamy piece. They ripped them from the earth and tossed them into a pile like trash. My father came home that evening to a patch of muddy, scarred earth. I confronted him, sobbing, but he just looked tired. "Brenda thinks it's for the best, honey," he said, his voice flat. He wouldn't even look at the empty space where the roses used to be. That was the day I realized I hadn't just lost my mother. I was losing my father, too. Soon, Kevin and Tiffany were born, and I faded even further into the background. I was the ghost of a former life, a relic Brenda couldn't quite get rid of. I learned to make myself small, to stay in my room, to become invisible. The final betrayal came when I was 18. I had worked so hard in high school. I knew my father's money came with Brenda's strings attached, so I was determined to make it on my own. I got accepted into the University of Texas, a dream come true, but only with a partial scholarship. My only hope of affording it without being indebted to Brenda was to win a prestigious local grant, a full-ride college fund for students who'd faced hardship. My school counselor had helped me with the application. I wrote about losing my mom, about my dreams of having my own business one day. I poured my heart into it. I had a good chance. I knew I did. Weeks went by. I was checking the mail every single day, my stomach in knots. One afternoon, I got home before Brenda and saw an official-looking envelope from the Scholarship Foundation addressed to my father. My hands trembled as I opened it. It wasn't a bill. It was a thank you letter. Dear Mr. Morgan, it read, "Thank you for your phone call and for providing additional context regarding Clara's application. While her academic record is impressive, the information you shared about her personal reliability and financial situation has given the committee cause for concern. We have decided to award the scholarship to another candidate." My blood ran cold. My father hadn't made any phone call. I knew it in my gut. I left the letter on the kitchen counter where I found it. Later that night, I heard them arguing in their bedroom. Brenda's voice was sharp. "She doesn't need a handout, Robert. She needs to learn responsibility. You are just enabling her." My father's replies were weak, tired murmurs. She had done it. She had called them, pretending to be a concerned parent, and she had poisoned them against me. She had stolen my future right out from under me. That was it. That was the last straw. I packed a single suitcase that night with my clothes and the few photos of my mom that I'd hidden away. I didn't look back. I was 18, with a broken heart and a future I now had to build entirely on my own, stone by painful stone. If you're still listening, would you do me a kindness? Please like this video and comment with the number 1 below. It lets me know you've given me a like, and it tells me you're here with me on this journey. Your support is a bigger encouragement than you can imagine. Just comment with the number 1, and then let me tell you what happened next. The first year of college was brutal. Without that scholarship, I was truly on my own. I found a tiny, run-down apartment above a laundromat that always smelled of bleach and damp clothes. The radiator hissed and clanked all night, but it was mine. It was my sanctuary. There were no heavy drapes, no cold marble floors, and most importantly, no Brenda. I became a master of juggling. My days were a frantic race against the clock. Classes from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. From 3 p.m. to 7 p.m., I worked the counter at a campus coffee shop, my hands perpetually stained with coffee grounds. From 8 p.m. until midnight, I was a waitress at a small Italian diner downtown, rushing plates of pasta to hungry customers. I'd get home long after midnight, my feet aching and my head buzzing, and force myself to study for a few more hours before collapsing into bed. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. Exhaustion was a constant companion. There were days I lived on leftover breadsticks from the restaurant and cheap coffee. My hands were chapped from constantly washing dishes, and I had permanent dark circles under my eyes. But it was a different kind of tired than the one I'd known in my father's house. That was a soul-deep weariness, the exhaustion of being invisible and unwanted. This was the exhaustion of fighting for something. This was the fatigue of building a life. And it felt, in a strange way, like victory. My father would call every few months. The calls were always short and awkward. He'd ask if I was eating enough, if my grades were okay. I could hear the guilt in his voice, a heavy, unspoken thing that hung in the silence between us. But I never told him about the scholarship. I never told him I knew what Brenda did. What was the point? He had made his choice years ago when he let her tear out my mother's roses. He lived in Brenda's world now, and there was no room for me in it. I kept the calls brief, my answers polite but distant. Each time we hung up, it felt like another shovelful of earth on the grave of what we once had. After I graduated, with a business degree I had bled for, I knew I couldn't work in a sterile corporate office. I'd spent 4 years in the hustle and bustle of cafes and restaurants, and I had fallen in love with the rhythm of it. The hiss of the espresso machine, the scent of freshly ground coffee, the quiet hum of conversations, it was the first place I'd felt a sense of belonging since my mother died. So, I took a massive leap of faith. I pulled every penny I had managed to save, took out a small business loan that terrified me, and found a tiny, forgotten storefront in a quiet Austin neighborhood. It was nothing fancy. It had 10 mismatched tables, chairs I'd found at thrift stores, and a chalkboard menu I wrote by hand every morning. I called it Eleanor's Rose. It was my way of planting her garden again. I filled the windowsills with small pots of roses. I hung framed photos of rose fields on the walls. I played the kind of soft, gentle music my mom used to hum. The early days were terrifying. Some days, only a handful of customers would walk in. I'd stand behind the counter, forcing a smile, while a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. The loan payments, the rent, the bills, they were a constant, looming threat. But slowly, painstakingly, things began to change. People started coming back. An old man who would read the newspaper for hours over a single black coffee. A group of young mothers who'd meet there after dropping their kids at school. A writer who sat in the same corner every day, typing away on his laptop. They became my regulars. They became my community. They became my family. For the first time in over a decade, I felt like I had a home. I had built something from the ashes of my past, something that was wholly and completely mine. And I thought, finally, that the ghosts of my father's house were behind me for good. 13 years. That's how long it had been. 13 years since I'd walked out of that cold, unfamiliar house with nothing but a suitcase and a shattered heart. My bakery, Eleanor's Rose, had become my entire world. It was my past and my future, my sanctuary and my livelihood. The ghost of Brenda and the shadow of my father had faded, becoming distant, muffled memories. And then, the phone rang. It was a cold February morning. I was frosting a batch of cupcakes, the sweet smell of vanilla filling the air. The number on the screen was one I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. "Is this Clara Morgan?" a clipped, formal voice asked. "Yes, this is she. This is Mr. Henderson, your father's personal assistant. I'm calling to inform you that Mr. Robert Morgan has been admitted to the hospital. It's serious." My heart stopped. The piping bag slipped from my hand, leaving a smear of pink frosting on the counter. He gave me the name of the hospital in Austin and nothing more. No details, just that one word, serious. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely lock the door to the bakery. I left a hastily scrawled "closed for emergency" sign on the door and drove, my mind a blank, terrified canvas. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and fear. I found the room number and walked down the polished corridor, my boots clicking softly on the floor. I expected to see my father. Instead, the doorway was blocked by Brenda. She hadn't changed much. She was still impeccably dressed in a silk blouse and tailored slacks, her hair perfect, her makeup flawless. The years had only sharpened her features, making her look harder, colder. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my simple jeans and flour-dusted apron I'd forgotten to take off. "What are you doing here, Clara?" she asked, her voice a low hiss. There was no greeting, no kindness. Just pure, undiluted disdain. "I'm here to see my father," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "He's resting," she snapped. "He doesn't need to be agitated." I stepped past her, refusing to be dismissed. And then I saw him. The man in the hospital bed was a shrunken, frail version of the father I remembered. His skin was pale and thin, stretched tight over his bones. He was surrounded by a web of tubes and wires, the soft, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor counting out his fragile moments. But when his eyes found mine, a flicker of light, of recognition, sparked within them. "Clara," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper. I rushed to his side, taking his hand. It felt cold and bony in mine, but his grip, though weak, was insistent. For a moment, we just looked at each other, and 13 years of anger and silence and hurt seemed to melt away, leaving only a deep, profound sadness. I missed you, I whispered, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path down my cheek. He closed his eyes, and a single tear of his own seeped from the corner. I missed you, too, honey. I should have called more. I should have been a better father. It's okay, Dad, I lied, even though it wasn't. Brenda lingered in the doorway like a vulture, her arms crossed, radiating impatience. I ignored her. I had brought a small gift, a framed photo from my childhood. It was a picture of my dad and me, when I was about 7, both of us covered in mud after trying to plant a tree in the rain. We were laughing, happy. I pulled it out of my purse to show him. I brought you something, I started to say. Before I could even place it on his bedside table, Brenda swept into the room. She snatched the photo from my hand. He doesn't need these painful memories, she said, her voice sharp and loud. He needs peace. Then she turned to a nurse who was checking his drip, a kind-faced woman in her 50s. Brenda raised her voice, making sure the nurse could hear every word. It's so sad when they only show up when they smell money, isn't it? The nurse looked mortified, her eyes darting between Brenda and me. My face burned with humiliation. My blood ran cold. This woman's cruelty knew no bounds. My father took a shaky breath, his eyes pleading with me. Clara, he whispered, pulling my attention back to him. Listen to me. I don't know how much time I have. I can't change the past. God knows I wish I could. But I can make sure you're taken care of. I've made arrangements. What arrangements? I asked, confused. He just shook his head slightly, the ghost of a smile on his lips. You'll understand when the time comes. Just trust me. The nurse gently suggested it was time for him to rest. As I stepped back out into the hallway, Brenda cornered me, her face inches from mine. Don't think for a second that this little deathbed performance changes anything, she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. When the will is read, you will see exactly where you stand. You are nothing to this family. You will get nothing. I didn't answer. I just turned and walked away, her words echoing in my ears. But beneath the pain and the humiliation, my father's last words to me had planted a tiny, mysterious seed of hope. Trust me. 2 weeks later, he was gone. The call came from Brenda, early in the morning. Her voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. Your father passed away an hour ago, she said, as if reporting the weather. The funeral is on Saturday. You can come, if you promise to stay out of the way. There was no comfort offered, no shared grief. Just a cold, logistical command. The funeral was held on a gray, drizzly Saturday. The kind of day that weeps with you. The cemetery was on a quiet hill overlooking the city, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and cedar trees. I stood at the back, a solitary figure in a simple black dress, separated from the main cluster of mourners by a wide, invisible moat of history and resentment. Brenda was at the front, a tragic figure in an elegant black coat and a wide-brimmed hat, playing the part of the grieving widow to perfection. Kevin and Tiffany stood beside her, their faces carefully composed masks of sorrow for the benefit of the crowd of my father's business associates and friends. Not once did any of them look in my direction. It was as if I were a ghost, visible only to myself. I listened to the pastor say words about a man I barely recognized, a titan of industry, a community leader. He didn't speak of the man who made silly faces at the dinner table or the father who held my hand in the dark after my mother died. When the casket was lowered into the ground, a fresh wave of grief hit me, a raw, aching sorrow for all the years we had lost, for the reconciliation that would never happen. The guests began to drift away, offering their condolences to Brenda, who accepted them with a graceful, practiced sadness. I waited until the crowd thinned, wanting just a moment alone at the fresh grave, a moment to say goodbye without the oppressive weight of her presence. But she found me first. I heard the crunch of her heels on the gravel path before I saw her. She stopped a few feet away, her lips curved into something that was almost a smile, but held no warmth. You can save yourself the trouble of hoping, she said, her voice soft, almost conspiratorial. It was a tone she used when she was about to be her most cruel. I know he said some things to you in the hospital. Delirious ramblings. Don't put any stock in them. I stared at her, my hands curling into fists inside my coat pockets. It had nothing to do with money, Brenda. She let out a short, sharp laugh. Oh, please, Clara. It's always about the money. With people like you, it always is. She took a step closer, lowering her voice. Let me be very clear, so there are no messy scenes later. You won't be getting anything from your father's inheritance. Robert knew who his real family was. Lucas and Sophie are his legacy now. Her eyes glittered, hard and cold as the diamonds at her throat. You, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, you were just a reminder of a past he wanted to forget. A past I helped him erase. The raw cruelty of it stole my breath. To say that at her husband's funeral, standing just feet from his grave, it was monstrous. A hot flash of anger crawled up my neck, but I held it back. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. The lawyer's office, I said, my voice quiet but steady. When? She seemed almost disappointed by my composure. Monday. 10 o'clock. Mr. Davis's office. Do try to wear something appropriate for once. She turned and glided away, her children trailing in her wake like well-trained dogs. When they were gone, I walked to the edge of the grave. The fresh mound of earth was stark against the green grass. The temporary marker bore his name, Robert Elias Morgan. I reached down and let my fingers brush against the damp soil. I'm sorry, Dad, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. I'm so sorry we ran out of time. I stayed there until the cemetery was empty and the gray sky began to darken, the drizzle turning into a steady, cold rain. As I walked back to my car, soaked and shivering, Brenda's words echoed in my head. But underneath them, quieter but more persistent, were my father's words. Trust me. Monday would come. And whatever happened, I knew I had to be there to see it through to the end. Monday morning arrived, cold and gray, just like the day of the funeral. I stood in front of the mirror in my small apartment, wearing the only black dress I owned. My hands were trembling slightly as I tried to fasten a simple necklace. I felt like a girl playing dress-up, about to walk into a battle she was destined to lose. But I took a deep breath, looked at my own reflection, and saw the same determined set of my mother's jaw. I would not let Brenda see me crumble. Mr. Davis's office was on the top floor of a downtown skyscraper, a world of polished wood, hushed tones, and panoramic city views. When I stepped into the conference room, the conversation stopped. Brenda was already there, at the head of the table, perfectly poised. The smug, victorious smirk was back on her face. Kevin and Tiffany were on either side of her. And with them was a man I didn't recognize, with slicked-back hair and a flashy watch. Clara, Brenda said, her voice dripping with condescension. This is my brother, Derek. He's here to make sure everything goes smoothly. Smoothly, I thought. For her. I took the only empty seat, at the far end of the table, feeling the weight of their collective stare. The tension in the room was a living thing, thick and suffocating. Brenda's eyes never left me. She was savoring this moment, the final act of my complete and utter erasure. Mr. Davis entered, his face grim, and sat down. He opened the thick leather-bound folder. We are here to read the last will and testament of Robert Morgan, he announced formally. Let's get on with it, shall we? Brenda said, waving a dismissive hand. Mr. Davis put on his glasses. As per Mr. Morgan's wishes, I will read this in full, he said, his eyes briefly flicking toward me. I, Robert Elias Morgan, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath the entirety of my estate, including all real property, liquid assets, and personal belongings, to my beloved wife, Brenda Morgan, and our children, Kevin Morgan and Tiffany Morgan. It was the same sentence I'd heard in my imagined nightmares for years. Brenda's smile widened. Kevin leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms like a king surveying his conquest. Tiffany shot me a triumphant, pitying look. My heart sank. So this was it. My father's last words had been nothing more than the ramblings of a dying man. I felt a hollow ache spread through my chest. Mr. Davis, however, kept reading, his tone unchanged. The remainder of my possessions shall be distributed according to my separate instructions, filed herewith. He paused, clearing his throat. And then, I saw it again. The same, fleeting, almost imperceptible twitch at the corner of his mouth. A spark of something. Brenda saw it too. Her smile faltered for a second. What separate instructions? She asked, her voice sharp. Mr. Davis continued as if he hadn't heard her. As stated, the will leaves the estate is filed to Mrs. Brenda Morgan and her children. That estate, he said, glancing down at a list in front of him, consists of one cabin property in rural Montana and one 2001 Ford pickup truck currently located at said property. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. Brenda just blinked. Excuse me? The cabin is in fair condition, Mr. Davis went on, his voice maddeningly calm. The truck runs, though it will require some maintenance. Kevin sat bolt upright. That's it? That's all? That is all that is listed in the will, yes, Mr. Harris confirmed. Brenda's face, which had been pale and composed, began to flush a deep, angry crimson. This is ridiculous. Where are the rest of the assets? The accounts? The company shares? My husband was worth $154 million. Her brother Derek cut in, his voice sharp. This is some kind of joke. Where is the real inheritance? I sat back in my chair, my heart starting to pound, not with despair, but with a wild, shocking surge of something else. Something was happening. This was my father's promise. Mr. Davis calmly reached into his briefcase and pulled out a second, even thicker folder. He placed it on the table with a soft thud. 3 years ago, he said, his voice now carrying a new weight, a new authority, Mr. Morgan created an irrevocable trust. Brenda's eyes narrowed. What? A legal instrument that is not part of the probate process, and therefore is not included in this will, Mr. Davis explained patiently. He opened the new folder. Into that trust, Mr. Morgan transferred all company shares of Morgan Construction, his entire investment portfolio, the main residence here in Austin, the beach house in Port Aransas, the Montana ranch, excluding the aforementioned cabin, the yacht, and all associated accounts and assets. Tiffany frowned, the first flicker of panic on her face. So, who gets that stuff? Mr. Davis looked up from his papers. He looked past Brenda, past her children, past her brother. He looked directly at me. And for the first time, he smiled. A full, genuine smile. The sole beneficiary of the trust, he declared, his voice ringing with clarity in the silent room, is his daughter, Ms. Clara Morgan. The words landed like a thunderclap. For a second, no one moved. It was as if the world had frozen. Then, chaos erupted. Brenda shot to her feet, her chair scraping violently against the floor. No, she shrieked, her voice high and shrill. No! That's impossible. He would never. It's a lie. It's all documented right here, Brenda, Mr. Davis said calmly, sliding copies of the trust agreement across the table. My father's bold, unmistakable signature was on every single page. Kevin slammed his fist on the table. You manipulated him, he spat at me, his face contorted with rage. You came crawling back at the end, pretending to care, and you poisoned him against us. I hadn't spoken to him in 13 years, I said, my voice quiet but shaking. I didn't even know this existed until this very moment. Liar! Brenda screamed. You don't deserve any of it. I was his wife. I took care of him. I gave him his family. Mr. Morgan made this decision well before his final illness. Mr. Davis's voice cut through the noise, calm and unyielding. His instructions were perfectly clear. He said, and I quote, "Clara is the only one who will protect what I built. She understands its value." The room devolved into a storm of curses and accusations. Derek was threatening legal action. Tiffany was openly sobbing. And Brenda just stood there, staring at the documents on the table as if her glare alone could set them on fire. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. There was no satisfaction in watching their world crumble. There was only a strange, overwhelming mix of sadness for all the years we had lost, and a profound, bone-deep relief. My father hadn't forgotten me. In his own quiet, complicated way, he had remembered. He had trusted me. Brenda was the first to break. She grabbed her purse, her movements stiff and jerky. "This isn't over," she hissed, her eyes locking onto mine, filled with a venomous hatred that was almost breathtaking. "I will fight this. I will drag you through every court in the state. You will not get away with this." "You are welcome to try," Mr. Davis replied, his polite smile never wavering. "But the trust is airtight." She swept out of the room without another word, her heels striking the polished floor in sharp, angry bursts. Kevin and Tiffany scrambled after her, but not before Kevin shot me one last look of pure loathing. Derek lingered for a moment, giving Mr. Davis a look that promised trouble, before storming out after them. Suddenly, the enormous conference room felt silent and empty. The storm had passed, leaving a strange, quiet calm in its wake. I just sat there, my hands still clasped in my lap, trying to process the tectonic shift that had just occurred in my life. Mr. Davis began gathering the papers, stacking them into a neat pile. He slid the main folder, the trust, across the gleaming table toward me. "It's a lot to take in," he said gently. "He wanted you to have it all, free and clear. He said you'd earned it." I ran my fingers over the thick folder. My throat felt tight. He really thought I could handle all this? Mr. Davis nodded, his expression softening. "He told me once, about a year after he set up the trust. We were talking about his legacy. He said, Brenda sees the company as a bank account. The kids see it as a toy box. Clara is the only one who remembers what it was like to build something from nothing. She'll know what to do." The image of my father in that hospital bed flashed in my mind, his weak grip, his tired eyes, the faint smile on his lips. Trust me. He had been telling me so much more than I'd realized. He was giving me back a future I never knew I had, a connection I thought was lost forever. I finally stood, tucking the folder under my arm. It felt impossibly heavy. "Thank you, Mr. Davis," I said, my voice low but steady. As I walked out of the building and into the bright Texas sun, the world looked different. The colors seemed sharper, the air cleaner. For the first time in more than a decade, I felt like I could finally, truly, breathe. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings with financial advisors, accountants, and the board of Morgan Construction. It was overwhelming, like being taught to fly a jumbo jet in midair. But I approached it the only way I knew how, one step at a time, just like I had with my little bakery. One afternoon, I used the keys Mr. Davis had given me and let myself into my father's old office at the company headquarters. It was exactly as he'd left it. In the top drawer of his desk, I found a sealed envelope with my name on it, written in his familiar, bold script. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "My dearest Clara," it read. "I wish I had been braver sooner. I can't give you back the years we lost, but I can give you the tools to build the future you deserve. I was so proud of what you built with Eleanor's Rose. So proud. Trust yourself. I always did. Love, Dad." I read it twice, my vision blurring with tears. Then I placed it carefully back in the drawer. A few months later, Mr. Davis informed me that Brenda, true to her word, had hired a team of lawyers and was preparing a massive lawsuit to contest the trust. I thought about the years of bitter fighting that lay ahead, the endless depositions and the character assassinations. And I realized I didn't want it. I didn't want her venom in my life for one more second. So, I had Mr. Davis make her an offer. I would buy the Montana cabin and the old truck from her for a generous sum, enough for her and her children to live comfortably, to start over somewhere else. In return, she would have to drop the lawsuit and sign an agreement never to contact me again. She took the deal. Her pride couldn't stand a protracted, public loss, and her greed couldn't resist the easy money. And me? I kept the bakery. I'm still there every morning, my hands dusted with flour, the smell of cinnamon and baking bread in the air. I run my father's company now, honoring his legacy of building things that last. But my home, my true north, will always be that little shop with the mismatched chairs and the pictures of roses on the wall. It's the place I rebuilt my life, a place I built with love. And every morning, when I unlock the door, I whisper the words my mother taught me, and the words my father left me. Trust yourself. Thank you so much for listening to my story all the way to the end. It means the world to me to be able to share it. If this story resonated with you in any way, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support truly makes all of this possible.